Unmitigated psychosocial hazards pose risk, and this psychosocial risk can lead to harm. The harm generally manifests as stress. A new alliance of professionals interested in addressing workplace stress has recently formed in the United States. We'll talk with the leader of this alliance up next on this episode of the Psychosocial Safety USA podcast. This is the Psychosocial Safety USA podcast. I'm Dr. I. David Daniels, occupational health and safety professional, researcher, and global thought leader in psychosocial safety. Across the country and around the world, many organizations are struggling because conditions inside them are working against the very human beings who keep them alive. Psychosocial safety remains aspirational in far too many places. In each episode, you'll hear about real experiences, the latest research, and practical strategies from experts that help organizations and the people inside them move closer to that aspiration. Psychosocial hazards are real and preventable. So let's get to work. Welcome to this episode of the Psychosocial Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Our goal for each episode is to increase awareness of the importance of psychosocial safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Stress is the body's natural response to demands, pressures, or perceived challenges, and it operates along a continuum from eustress to distress. Eustress is the form of stress that enhances functioning, that kind of sharpens focus, fuels motivation, and supports growth. It's the energy you feel when you're engaged, challenged, and striving towards something meaningful. Distress, by contrast, occurs when demands exceed a person's perceived capacity to cope. It's associated with overwhelm, loss of control, and psychological strain. While eustress can be adaptive, distress is the form most associated with negative health outcomes. Psychosocial harm is directly connected to stress because psychosocial hazards such as high workload, low control, bullying, exclusion, or organizational injustice create conditions that are perceived or experienced as unfavorable. When those conditions persist, the body's stress response becomes chronic. Over time, this chronic activation shifts from stress to harm, producing measurable effects on cognition, behavior, and philosophy, and physiology. In other words, psychosocial harm is not simply feeling stress. It is the cumulative impact of exposure to adverse social and organizational conditions that trigger sustained distress. This is why psychosocial safety is foundational. It reduces exposure to the conditions that convert ordinary stress into harm, pain, hurt, and ultimately trauma. So there's a new group that's formed to discuss work stress prevention, and we're going to chat with one of the visionaries behind the group to learn a little bit more about the conversation in general, the organization specifically, and a bunch of other things that are workplace stress related, but not in a stressful way. So let's start this conversation, as I so often do, with an introduction of my guest by my guest with this question. Who is Dr. Marnie Dobson?
Thanks, Dr. David Daniels. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought your introduction was spot on. I really couldn't say any more. I mean, I think it's a really important thing to really think about stress, not just as a lived feeling in the body, but also as something that happens from your external social environment. But first of all, who am I? I, from starting off that way, am a sociologist by training. So I'm really interested in the social world and how it becomes, how it affects individuals, through institutions like the family, through institutions like the economy. We mostly look at the effects of institutions on individual, in the case of medical sociology, individual health and well-being. So I started this not, though, as a sociologist, this interest in this area. I came from a pretty working class background. I was the first generation college student, first in my family to go to a university. And, I grew up with parents who worked really, really hard jobs. My dad drove taxis for 10 years plus. My mom was a house cleaner and a hotel housekeeper for many, many years. And I watched them as I was growing up work really hard to make ends meet. But also I noticed as well the impact on their bodies of the jobs they did. And especially for my dad, who ended up with pretty severe hypertension, as unfortunately a lot of drivers do end up with very high rates of hypertension. So any kind of driver in the US throughout the world has much higher rates of hypertension than other occupations. And a lot of it has to do with just the process of doing that job, of being on alert all the time and having that experience of chronic everyday stress. It does create a physiological stress response, which increases blood pressure. And over time, we know that can develop into hypertension. So that was a lived experience for me, watching people work hard and having that impact on their bodies. And, when I became a sociologist, I was also really interested in health and in population health. And, why do we in the US, despite spending trillions and trillions of dollars on medical treatment and medical care, we have some of the worst outcomes in the world in terms of infant mortality, maternal mortality, in terms of life expectancy, which has been an ongoing issue for the US, where at least we've had several years of dropping life expectancy, which I won't get into, but I think has a lot of social causes that we can talk about a little bit more. But from becoming a sociologist, I also ended up kind of sidestepping a little bit, as you do sometimes in careers, and started working with some occupational epidemiologists who are sort of cousins of sociologists in public health. They're really interested in the social causes of illness, how our social world makes us sick ultimately. And one of them, my colleague, Dr. Peter Schnall, has done a lot of work on stress and work-related stress and its impact on high blood pressure. And he and other colleagues have done a lot of research for many, many years, making that connection in really large populations between people who work in jobs that have, as you mentioned, really high job demands. So a lot of workloads, a lot of pressures. We all know friends that work too much and have a lot of expectations in their job. But as well, they have a low control, which we've talked about. So that combination, he found in a large population study, the New York City worksite blood pressure study, they found increases in ambulatory blood pressure among those folks that had what they call job strain, which is high demands and low control. And so, there's been ongoing research over the last 40 years that has connected these kinds of work stress, models that we talk about, like job strain, to not just psychological strain and psychological distress, but also to cardiovascular disease, including blood pressure. So that research, was way before my time. But when I started work in the University of California as a researcher, I brought my sociology with me. And one of the things I felt was really important is to actually sit down and talk to workers themselves. So I do a lot of qualitative research, and we worked with firefighters, which we have in common. We had a large study called the Forward Study, where we actually talked about firefighter weight issues, obesity, which people wouldn't think of when it comes to firefighting, because people start off very fit and healthy, and but as they age in this very stressful job, a lot of firefighters, have a hard time keeping the weight off. And we sat down and talked to folks about it. And they talked a lot about the 24-hour shifts and the multiple overtime shifts and how that affected their sleep and their eating habits and their ability to exercise and the combination of work-life balance, the amount of time they have to give to their families, but also are, away a lot. And those all are basically psychosocial stressors in firefighting that we wouldn't normally think about, because most of the time we think about exposure to smoke, particulates, and chemicals and toxins and so on.
Physical stuff. Yeah.
Physical stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, it was a really fascinating insight. And, there's a lot of firefighters, as you know, that are working to mitigate that, to try to improve conditions so that firefighters aren't losing years off their life when they end up retiring at 55 from factors that aren't directly related to the physical hazards of the firefighting, but to the psychosocial as well. So there was that was a really great study, really interesting work that we were able to do with the firefighters, and following that, we also did some work with bus drivers, with transit workers, who also have really incredibly stressful jobs beyond just the driving component alone. Is you're on these big vehicles in traffic, driving around what can be very difficult streets and city here in Los Angeles, and dealing with passengers.
Yes, that part, and dealing with passengers who are in various states of, emotional and mental, challenge themselves and take it out on the drivers. And I have one of my sister-in-laws is a transit operator up in the Seattle area. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, again, this is a question that's consistent across all 172 or 3 of these episodes, except when I talk to myself. But what does psychosocial safety mean to you, the concept?
Well, it's a good question. And I think, I think psychosocial as a term that we use a lot within the field is not a widely known term in the general public and even more broadly. But it is used extensively when we look at other countries' occupational safety and health, frameworks in Europe and now Australia, but Canada, they all have psychosocial hazard management systems or risk management systems in place now, which in the US, as you know, we're lacking on any attention to these psychosocial hazards, which will bring me to talking about the Alliance a little bit more in a minute. But for me, I think putting the terminology aside, psychosocial to me is psychological and social. It's a combination in which the individual, as you said, experiences things in their social environment that are perceived as threats, right? That are basically challenging people to the extent where they're not able to cope, as you mentioned, and it provokes basically a chronic stress response. So when you put psychosocial together, it's a quality in the way in which, in the specific work-related psychosocial hazards, the way in which work is organized, right, and the way in which organizations and work is designed, that give rise to these factors in the workplace that challenge people and can put them under chronic work stress situations. And so I see psychosocial hazards as the root causes of chronic stress. So they exist in the social work environment because ultimately work, I always say this, we sort of think of work and work processes just the way they are. This is the way work is. It's a natural thing, right? But it's completely man-made.
Totally. It's socially constructed.
It's socially constructed, we like to say. What does that mean? It means that we have schools that educate people about how to manage a worker and workers and how production processes should be set up. And those can be relearned and changed and have been. When we look back, we can think of the different experiments that have taken place in the assembly line workers, with Volvo and the Uppsala, production where you worked in teams, versus the parts of an assembly line that people are part of. But, I think what I think of as psychosocial hazards, these root causes, because they are created socially and to some extent psychologically, they can also be affected and improved socially as well. So we can really think about psychosocial safety then as, how organizations can go about reducing those psychosocial hazards, about trying to control or eliminate them. In some cases, it's not possible to eliminate all of these kinds of hazards, but through really assessing the organization, how it's functioning, we can reduce things like workload, job demands. We can give workers more of a say over how their deadlines are working out, or how much time they have to be available on the weekends or, after the workday's over. And, sort of these small things that we can kind of consider that are organizational.
Yes, yeah.
So that's the way I think about psychosocial safety.
And different from physical safety. I think sometimes that's a part of the challenge that people have, is that they conflate the safety word, and then they think about all the physical things, and they go, well, if it was a chemical, we just put it in a particular place and store it in a certain way and separate from it and all of that, and everything would be okay. And yeah. I'm of the belief that psychosocial safety is always custom. There is no cookie cutter approach that's going to work for anybody, any organization, and it won't work for that same person or organization over time, because people change, environments change. And so as opposed to this kind of standard, a lot of in risk management, they have what are called risk registers, and that doesn't work for psychosocial hazards. The question is, how adaptive are we to the thing in the environment that may not inherently be right or wrong, good or bad, necessarily harmful to everybody, but it's harmful to this person. So how is that person able to adapt, and how are we able to adapt such that the harm is minimized or eliminated? I would love to believe that we could eliminate all psychosocial hazards. It's just not possible, because people are different. And you eliminate it for 3 people, it's going to create an issue for the other 5. That's just the way it is. You mentioned firefighters and such, and I spent a bunch of years in the fire rescue service, and particularly as and the example that people get is as so I started in the early 80s, and when I came on a job in Seattle, the senior female firefighter had been on the job for 4 years when I showed up. 4, but the department had been around for almost 100. So that means they spent 90 plus years building an entire system that worked really well for guys. It did. And as a matter of fact, interestingly, in 1959, they decided it was okay to have a guy who wasn't a white guy. So they had years and years and years of a system being built for a particular population, and then they bring in different people. And so while it may have worked for that group, it didn't work for this group because you didn't really design it for them anyway. And I think that's a lot of the issue that people have from a psychosocial safety perspective, is that they expect an environment that wasn't built to be safe for this particular person, and now they just want to make it that way. And that takes work. It takes ongoing management to make sure that happens. Yeah. Yes. That's right. That's right. I have a question I want to ask that is, I'm making something simple that isn't simple. It's not really this binary, but if you had to, if you had to decide what part of your life has informed your view of psychosocial safety, would you say it's your research, your lived experience, or the expertise from your profession? Which one of those three things do you think has had the greatest impact on how you view psychosocial safety?
Well, I think because psychosocial safety kind of arose out of the research world, really. I mean, it is a term that comes out of research and science. And I think a lot of these ideas are scientific models that, have been tested in large populations and found to result in, large scale chronic disease burdens, right? So coming from an occupational epidemiology world, what people are finding is that the workplace isn't as benign as we think it is. We know that, X percentage of depression, for example, can be caused by work. I think it's somewhere in some studies around 20 to 25% of depression is affected by work and the organization of work. Now, that's not that everyone who works is going to get depressed. What we know is that there's a proportion of work that and the workplace and factors in the workplace that contribute to the population burden of depression, which, costs billions and billions of dollars all the time. So when you look at 20% of the population that may be, experiencing depression as a result of work, that's a lot of people. It's millions and millions of people. So for me, that reality it does come. My knowing that comes out of the field of occupational epidemiology, and it also comes out of a concern with a public health concern that we need to try to lower the burden of disease on these populations by looking at work as a place where we can make positive change. So I would say it does come out of the science, but also because as a sociologist, I can sit down with workers, individuals, and we can talk about, the statistical issue. Oh, so 30%, 40% of drivers are overweight or obese, which is potentially medically problematic for the longevity of people who drive, right? Not everyone is going to be obese or overweight, but what do you think about the risk? How do you think that your work might be contributing to that? And of course people know, sitting on their butts, driving all day makes it really hard to burn calories.
Right.
And we know that exposure to stressful psychosocial hazards can also affect cortisol levels. It can affect digestion. It can affect, cognitive function and the ability to recover, well at home. So you may not be able to, you may be tired and you're maybe not eating as well as you could. So there's a lot of indirect effects there as well in work. So when people tell me and talk about that experience, it makes it more real, because I think working people know that their jobs have an impact on their health, and they talk about that. And we all know family members that have had their health impacted by their jobs. I have, some family members that have had that happen as well. And the reality for individuals can be really extreme, and it's not necessarily, and I think that's the key, is that it's not, it's sort of getting to the point where because people tend to blame themselves. Oh, I have hypertension because I ate too much salt, or I didn't exercise enough. But there's also these social environments that they spend so much of their time in, the workplace, that contribute. And maybe if everyone knew that, we would have people be able to say, look, we need to improve this a little bit. Let's at least have more recovery time in between these long shifts that drivers have. They have these split shifts where they do, 4 or 5 hours in the morning and 4 or 5 hours in the evening during rush hour, because it benefits, Metro to have people on in the mornings and in the afternoons. That's when the most demand is. But in between time is another 3 hours where they're not at home, not able to take care of themselves. So that makes for really long days. And then, by the time they get home, if they do overtime shifts, they're not seeing their kids. They're having to get up and turn around again, so they may not be getting more than 6-7 hours of sleep. Right? So let's think about ways we can, increase the recovery time for those folks that are working long hours and long shifts. Same goes with firefighters and nurses.
I find it, again, really interesting how much energy we've put as a society into designing work around the work. So the work is designed to do more work. And in many cases, as a matter of fact, I'd say until probably my lifetime, to be quite honest, there was little or very little concern about the worker. If you think about when they were building the, things like the Empire State Building and such, construction at that period at the time it was built, they assumed that a certain number of workers were going to die depending on how tall the building was going to be. And that was just accepted, that people went into that occupation knowing that, my dad used to do that work, but he died when I was 12 because he fell off of whatever. And there's a part of me that is, sad to think about that, but also I believe that we're having that same realization from a psychosocial perspective now, that what used to be normal, so again, the bullying and harassment, mistreatment over, the stress of work is becoming less and less acceptable to workers, and some organizations are figuring out, look, that's just not good for us. I mean, this person that we've invested all this time and this training and this capability in can't be here because their blood pressure is too high, not because of what they ate, but because we stressed them out. They just had a heart attack, or they had some other, or there is no physical reason why they can't be here, but emotionally, they can't get out of bed. They can't come to work. They can't interact with folks. Or when they do interact, they're yelling and they're violent. There's all these things going on. And it's because the workspace itself was designed to do work and not to take care of people who produce work. And I think that that's the switch that people are starting to have. And I call myself a Gen Zer that was born too early, because I find myself agreeing with the way that they see work, which is, I don't believe that's right. I don't think I should come to work and be stressed out all the time. I don't think I should really have to put that amount of pressure and barely get paid and not have enough time off and all of that. So I'm encouraged that we are, as a society, starting to change. And I believe this is a transition I believe that the efforts around this group that you've pulled together called the Work Stress Prevention Alliance, I think it's going to help. So talk a little bit about where the idea came from of getting a bunch of people together to talk about work stress.
Yes. Well, I've actually had the privilege of working with a lot of people that talk a lot about work stress for a lot of years, believe it or not. As I said, I started out as a researcher at UC Irvine, and we had a group that was called the Work Organization Research Group, so we were really focused on work stress and health and doing research in that area. And just pushing, from the sidelines, because recognizing that stress at work and psychosocial related issues were not prioritized by any means by most of the worker health and safety infrastructure. Unfortunately, including NIOSH and OSHA in the US, OSHA does not recognize to some extent the role of psychosocial hazards as a safety and health issue. Formally, they have the general duty clause where there is a duty to care, but it's not particularly enforced ever. So, myself and a group of folks who do research in psychosocial hazards over the many years, we wanted to raise awareness about these issues. And we did that through our nonprofit, the Center for Social Epidemiology, for a long time, which has been around since 1988, if you can believe it. So, my colleague, Peter Schnell, the founder, was very vocal about making this a stronger issue in the US, because it has been a lot stronger in other countries, including Europe, since the 1970s Scandinavian Work Environment Act. And now in many other countries, there's national regulations or legislation that include psychosocial hazards in health and safety. So from all of that work in the research world, we turned and said, look, we need more information out there about the research. We need to translate the research for workers, for employers who should understand that this kind of unhealthy work environment can be affecting their bottom line. If they're not motivated by, having more productive, healthy workers, then maybe they'll be motivated by the fact that they're losing money to sick leave and losing money to presenteeism, where people are not well enough to work as productively as they could. They may be losing work to healthcare costs as people become sick from the work. They use more healthcare. So we wanted to get the word out to employers and also to labor unions who, some of which are focused on, the physical hazards of the work environment, as is important because we still have 5,000 people or more dying a year from physical safety and traumatic injuries. But also there's a lot of unions that recognize that the psychosocial environment is causing harm to their workforce, especially in healthcare and especially among first responders, and teachers, So these unions have been really interested in those things. So we launched a Healthy Work campaign as an offshoot to be like, look, we need to raise awareness about these issues. We want more people to be thinking about them. And ultimately, we'd like to push forward with a more standardized approach to psychosocial hazards in the US. And that's where the Work Stress Prevention Alliance comes in, because we had a wonderful meeting at the Work Stress and Health Conference in August 2025 with some folks that I'd been working with for many years on psychosocial research. And people before that, there'd been some work produced by the U.S. Surgeon General, which you might be aware of, on workplaces as engines of well-being, of mental well-being. There was a greater attention to the mental health effects of the workplace as a result of COVID. And one of our members of the Alliance had published an article which was an urgent call to address psychosocial hazards in the US, and that was in 2024. Some of these authors were affiliated with NIOSH. So in response to that article, the Surgeon General's report, and some other things, we wanted to have this meeting in 2025. Okay, what can we do to keep pushing this momentum along? Because we felt like there was some momentum. And we created our first meeting in September 2025, and we had about 15 or 20 folks that attended. And, we really wanted to create a coalition and a collaboration with folks that were part of labor unions that are really interested in dealing with these psychosocial issues, or already do, like AFT, which has a big stress management program for their members. And as well as, experts in our field and worker advocates, that are from the occupational, environmental health and safety community, and so on, so that we could begin to kind of put together all of the information that we have around what are psychosocial hazards, what harm do they cause, and what's the best approach to addressing them here in the US, given that we, may not see national regulation like other countries have in the near future, possibly. So that was the start of the group. And I think, we've had meetings for almost a year now, not quite a year, about just short of a year. And, the group is growing. There's a lot of interest, like your interest as well.
Right.
Because I think there's been a lot of people out there working in different parts of the elephant, so to speak, that we could come together and try to create some kind of consensus about how psychosocial hazards could be better addressed in the US. So bring together all the knowledge, all the experience, both lived and research, and set up some goals for ourselves as a group of people that share this interest in moving this forward.
So in 2022, when I started doing this podcast, I was under the impression at the time that there might have been a handful of people who cared about this in the U.S., and I didn't think there was a handful. I really didn't, because my first exposure was to people from Canada, UK, and Australia. No one in the U.S. told me about this. And it's not that, so I'm starting to find out that it's not that the conversation wasn't going on. I just wasn't in the room where it was being had. And that's, and I think we've got a lot of other issues that way. But the other thing that I've started to notice is, with the 40 or so countries that have regulation around the world, many of them used research from the U.S. to justify their laws and their standards. They used research from across this country, and they're using it in theirs. And there's something that says, well, when are we going to do something with it here?
Exactly.
And the other thing too, that it doesn't really bother me that we may not have a law anytime soon, because the optimist in me believes that there are people out there right now. There are individuals, there are companies, there are organizations, profit and nonprofit, who want to have a better work environment. They just don't really have all the tools. The only tools that they have are the ones that have been passed along over the last 100 plus years. The United States was a country for 190 plus years before it decided it wanted to have a law that made killing people at work against the law. I mean, seriously. So this system was not set up to care that much about the human beings. It was set up to get business done and to make money and all of that. But I think that there is, again, a belief. I'm not against making money either. I'm really not.
No, I mean, we do that really well here in the U.S. We've got an enormous economy. We put people to work. There are positive things about a robust economy.
Absolutely. The yeah, but to that is there are also some, I think, some almost unintended harms associated with some of that drive. I'm a believer in the work of Mary Parker Follett, who was of the opinion that if we can create environments where human beings can get great things done together, then we'll also make money. They're not. It's kind of a false choice. Either be kind and treat people with dignity and respect, or go broke. I believe that you're going to do better if you treat people with kindness and dignity, and people are paid well. I think we'll all do better, but not everybody feels that way.
I know. And, in 2009, my colleagues and I, we published a book called Unhealthy Work, Causes, Consequences, and Cures. And in the conclusion of that book, we wrote about what is a good society. And a good society puts people at least into the same, barrel as the profits. So we can't completely ignore the humanity, the constraints of the human body, in terms of the impact of a workplace or the impact of other social determinants of health, including poverty and polluted neighborhoods and all of these other factors. Work is one of those social determinants, and it has a big impact on health and safety of workers. And I do agree. I think we have to be optimists in this field to think that we can make incremental change and bring forward the people that do want to have businesses and companies that respect their workers, that will help them grow and adapt, to changing circumstances.
That's right. That's right.
People have babies. People get sick.
Exactly right. That's right.
It may or may not be caused by work, and at those times, there's, if you have a model of work where you're not allowing people to be people, you're going to cause friction and stress, and people are either going to have to leave their jobs, or, not do so well.
Well, I am a believer that organizations have a binary choice between evolution and extinction. It's a binary. You either evolve, or you're going to go out of business, become extinct, not be able to do that eventually. Because systems, particularly systems that are attempting to generate profit, are generally going to need to do that around people, because it's people who have money, people who are going to spend, people who are going to work. But again, I think folks are going to figure that out. And if they don't, unfortunately, they're going to be replaced by those who do. These younger people aren't going to continue to work. I don't see people putting up with the kinds of physical harms that they put up with in the 1900s. They just don't do it. People can't just go to work and get their hand cut off and nobody reports it. It's not happening. So again, that's the population of people that I really find myself energized and enthused to talk to, is the ones who I want to get this better. I want to change. I want this to be great for people. And so if you, as a optimistic, forward-looking, if you were reading in the newspaper, or not newspapers, probably dating myself, if you're looking in the media in general 5 years from now, what are people saying about the Work Stress Prevention Alliance 5 years from now?
Well, I hope that we can make some inroads into bringing the best practices from various fields, in terms of addressing psychosocial hazards, because there are some common approaches that we've kind of brought together internationally and within the US. We know that employers can implement programs to prevent psychosocial hazards and address workplace mental health and other issues like that. That include, first of all, assessing the workplace. We don't know what we don't know. We have to make the invisible visible. And to some extent, when we do that, and there's a lot of different ways of doing that, then it becomes a real thing and not just an anecdote that one individual talks about.
Right.
So I think measuring, the impact of psychosocial hazards, or looking for the psychosocial hazards by talking to workers, listening to workers through focus groups, or, some kind of message box or a survey, this will give people a sense of how widespread certain problems are. I've had that happen with organizations that have done the Healthy Work Survey. One of the things we measure is workplace bullying. And when we give the results to the organization, a lot of the leadership, HR, management, are shocked to hear that 30 to 40% of their people are experiencing workplace bullying. And, this is something that would not otherwise have come to light. Because a lot of times people are afraid to say this is happening because they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to be demoted. They don't want to have to go through a process where maybe the perpetrator is protected. So I think it's really important to bring these issues to light. Workload is a really hard thing for individuals to talk about. But if you have enough data to say, look, 60% of your people are reporting like really high levels of stress related to workload, there's something going on here. So let's begin to think about what is going on and what we can do about it. And that has to happen at the organizational level in that case. So I think measuring and understanding what the problem is step one. Step two is including workers in solving the problem, and also leadership committing to doing that. Because without that, you're not going to really be able to solve the problems from top down. Workers know where the issues are, and they often have the most knowledge about work processes.
They do.
Right?
They do.
And I think that's something that we know all around the world now, that worker participation is essential in this process. And then the third step is there are proven, testable, evidence-based programs, policies, practices that can be implemented to address workload, to address workplace bullying, to try to reduce the incidences of these psychosocial hazards. And there's steps that can be taken to put them in place, with help. If you're a small organization, there are things that you can do that don't take a lot of money, that don't require a lot of consulting. Maybe you're a huge organization and you have ability to hire a consultant to help do this. But then evaluating and reviewing that impact. So having organizations include this process along with looking at physical safety issues. And I think that's doable. And I think that's something that I think the Work Stress Prevention Alliance, I hope in 5 years, will try to make more common from a number of different ways, whether it be working directly with employers that are interested in putting this into place. And I know there are employers out there because, you and I have both worked with them. With unions that might be able to put it into their collective bargaining contract. Like, let's do this. Let's put this in. Let's look at psychosocial hazards as well as physical hazards. And then, policy or regulation, maybe on a statewide basis where the state says, look, we want this to be part of our OSHA. We want employers to think about psychosocial issues along with physical issues in the workplace. So I hope we can make some inroads as a group that represents a lot of different interests.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things you said just really resonated with me. Making the invisible visible. I wrote this book that came out about a year ago, and the entire intent behind the title is trying to get people to see that psychosocial hazards are a thing. They are real. They are. They're a real thing, and I think for some people that's the starting place, because we got to get people to recognize that it's something. It's not just a figment of people's imagination, and it is having real impacts on real human beings. Real people are being affected. So the invisible is becoming visible through the harm that it's causing for real people. So why not go upstream rather than, as Bishop Desmond Tutu said, instead of picking people out of the river, why don't we go upstream and find out why they got tossed in the river in the first place?
Why they're jumping in the first place,
right.
yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We're in total agreement.
Absolutely. So if there are folks who want to get more information about the Alliance, about the Healthy Work Campaign, about the center, they want to learn more from you, what's the best way to do that?
So for now, we have an email address, contact@healthywork.org, which is the best way to reach the Alliance. We also have a website for now for the Alliance at healthywork.org/WSPA. And it has a nice list of some of the Alliance membership and who we're affiliated with. And we have a great array of folks from different fields: occupational, environmental health and science, health and safety, from academia, occupational epidemiologists, economists, sociologists, one sociologist. No, I think there's a couple. And the Healthy Work Campaign as well. We have a website at healthywork.org, which, we have a lot of resources. We have a lot of information that we've produced over the years that help to educate people about what the heck psychosocial hazards are and what the heck to do about them, which is, the most important thing. Is like one thing to point out all the problems and the impacts on people. It's another thing to say, hey, this is addressable. There are ways to address them. And so we have some very practical, information on that, that we're all hoping to pull together with the Alliance into a larger national place that can be distributed more widely and broadly than any one group alone can do.
That's right. Well, Marnie, thank you so much for spending some time with me and sharing what you've shared. Again, it is really encouraging. Like I said, I thought a couple of years ago, wouldn't it be nice if there was a group of people who get together and talk about this whole psychosocial thing? And I just found myself in a lot of rooms where people kind of look at me sideways and kind of go like, that's that stuff those Australians do. But but that's okay.
Exactly.
It is encouraging to see that, the seed is planted. It is starting to bear a little bit of fruit. And, for however long it takes, it's okay. I mean, we didn't, as a country, we didn't get to where we are right now overnight. We won't solve this overnight. And as the famous tennis player Arthur Ashe said, success is a journey. It's not a destination. So
I love that. And another Australian.
Yeah.
Oh no. There's an Arthur Ashe Stadium.
Oh, yes, yeah. But Arthur Ashe, I think, was born in Richmond, Virginia. So
that's right, of course.
That's right. But
oops, claiming someone not our own.
Hey, but you know what? But that shows the power that some people bring to the earth. That you have different communities that want to claim them. And I'm okay. Claim all the positive things, because nobody wants to claim the stuff that's not. So, but again, thanks very much for the conversation.
Thanks, David. I love what you're doing. Keep spreading the word, and I'm really excited that you're part of the Work Stress Prevention Alliance, and we hope to keep moving the conversation forward and involving folks that can spread that word even more widely.
Absolutely. Well, that's about all for this one, and I'm sure we'll have we'll be having lots more conversation in the very near future.
I hope so.
All right. Thanks for joining this episode of the Psychosocial Safety USA podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with others who are committed to building safer workplaces. To catch up on previous episodes, visit our website at psychosocialsafetyusa.com or on YouTube at Psychosocial Safety USA Podcast. You can also follow my work on Substack at Dr. I. David D. If you have questions, suggestions for future guests, or would like to share your own workplace experiences, send an email to info@psychosocialsafetyusa.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Psychosocial Safety USA podcast.